Hello, it's Big Cheds. I'm back with another chapter of My Battles with Cancer, a candid patient and caregiver's memoir. I published this book back in 2020, and then I re-edited it and republished it in November of 2023. It's available on audiobook now, but I want to make it available to everybody for free. And that's why I'm reading it one chapter at a time here on YouTube. I'm Cheds Trading. I've previously published Trading Wisdom and Trading Quotes. Those are also available on Amazon. So we just did hair last time. My hair started to grow back after chemotherapy. Now the chapter is, did you just say radiation? So we'll jump right in, and I'm going to read it straight through. If I make a mistake, like whatever, I'm just going to keep going. So, did you just say radiation? The day finally came, and it was time to have my final scan done. This was what I had been waiting for. It would reveal if I still had cancer, so needless to say, the stakes were extremely high. To prepare, I had to fast for 6 hours beforehand, and since this was an early morning appointment, that meant that I had to skip breakfast. Sitting there and waiting for my name to be called, I was famished, but nonetheless willing to suffer some minor hunger pangs to get the job done. Eventually, the nurse led me through several sets of doors and into another room with a large industrial-looking machine waiting for me. The sheer size and configuration of this beast was intimidating, with its polished black carapace and hardened steel frame set before me. It had a futuristic-looking heads-up display and a circular chamber for my body to slide into. The staff instructed me to lay down on the table, to raise my hands behind my head, and stay as still as possible, especially when that red light was on. The technicians began the procedure, and the platform on which I was laying started to slowly retract into the machine. The doctor had ordered a scan of both above and below my diaphragm, and each side was supposed to take about 15 minutes. Once I was in position, I was face to face with a rectangular display that indicated when to breathe and when to hold my breath. There was also a voice recording echoing those same instructions. When the procedure was complete, I went upstairs for a quick meal before meeting with the medical oncologist to find out the results. This day, my wife joined me, and a nurse led us to an examination room to wait for my medical oncologist. This room was small and somewhat intimate, with just enough space for the doctor's chair, an examination table, and 3 more chairs. My wife and I sat down near the door, and then my sister joined us soon thereafter for this critical meeting. It was thoughtful of her to stop by and to be with me during this moment because I knew how busy she was with her own patients. It was incredibly helpful to have someone on my team able to ask the doctor specific medical follow-up questions, as my questions were mostly based on what little I had pieced together from the internet. That kind of ace up my sleeve made a big difference for me emotionally and gave me just a little extra confidence going into all of my appointments. Waiting for the doctor, I suddenly realized something, and a sense of deja vu washed over me. My wife, my sister, and I were all sitting in the exact same position in the exam room as when I first got my cancer diagnosis. That was a strange feeling. A few moments later, the doctor calmly walked in and sat down. I tried to study his face and body language for clues, but he gave none away. As a side note, he would have made an excellent poker player, as I'm usually quite adept at reading body language. The medical oncologist indicated that he wanted to begin that day with a physical examination, so I sat down on the table as he drew a privacy curtain around us. My sister couldn't see me behind this barrier, but my wife, who was sitting next to the doctor's desk, she had a fine view. For whatever reason that day, I had forgotten, quote unquote, forgotten to apply underarm deodorant. So when the doctor examined my left armpit area in close detail, my wife watched on in horror with her mouth hanging open. That horror soon turned into mischief as we made eye contact and we could not hold back from laughing. The doctor was puzzled at our reaction, and so we explained to him why we were laughing, and thankfully, he was a good sport. After completing the examination, the doctor indicated that he was now ready to discuss the results of my PET CT scan. He began by explaining the grading system for a PET CT scan of a patient in my situation, post-chemotherapy. The score is on a scale from 1 to 5, indicating how responsive the cancer was to treatment. Responsive in this case means that the cancer cells were impacted and ultimately destroyed by the combination of drugs I took, R-CHOP. A 5 rating on this scale meant that the cancer had almost no response to the chemotherapy treatment, and an alternative method of fighting this disease would have to be explored. A 1 rating on this scale meant that the cancer had a complete response to the chemotherapy and was essentially eradicated. He explained that my score was a 3, which meant that the cancer was technically fully responsive. However, it was not as convincing as a 1 or a 2 rating would indicate. The doctor went on to explain that there was now roughly a 1 in 8 chance of the cancer coming back, and mentioned that I might want to consider radiation treatment as a precaution. Hearing the word radiation, after hearing that word, I was at a complete loss. I had created a false paradigm in my mind where I was going to be told that I was 100% cancer-free or not, and I had set myself up for disappointment. What was this in-the-middle nonsense? I was beyond devastated, and my vision of a post-cancer life was rapidly slipping away. The last thing I wanted was to subject my body to any more treatment, as I was still recovering from the chemotherapy. Without question, I did not want to undergo radiation. I just could not stand the idea of those weird X-rays and other particles bombarding my body. Just the thought of it made me shiver, as I was already feeling so incredibly vulnerable. I just wanted to return to a normal life. My body and soul had just been through an epic journey, enduring some severe trauma along the way. Every fiber of my being was telling me that I needed to rest and that radiation was not a good idea. The doctor explained that with my case of lymphoma, there were additional risk factors due to the armpit tumor's bulky classification. The tumor in my armpit had grown to over 8 centimeters, though the one in my abdomen was not as large, that too had grown from almost 3.5 to 5 centimeters in a 4-week period. The doctor suggested that I make an appointment with a radiation oncologist, which is someone who treats cancer with radiation. My current doctor was a medical oncologist, or someone who treats cancer with chemotherapy. The doctor was of the opinion that having radiation to the left armpit tumor area, was a no-brainer. The decision about my abdomen tumor area was more of a judgment call, mostly due to an increased risk of side effects down the road. He emphasized that there was a higher risk to reward ratio for treating that armpit area. However, radiation to my abdomen area could potentially cause issues with my liver and my colon, as well as my bowels. I was also warned that there could be damage to my sperm, potentially rendering me infertile. The doctor also mentioned the risk of forming a new cancer called a secondary cancer. Hearing that pretty much took my breath away. again. My medical oncologist said that the radiation oncologist would recommend an exact dose of radiation, and that way I can make an informed decision. From what I understood, processing all the information, if I did go through with the radiation, the chance of my cancer coming back would go from around 1 in 8 to around 1 in 30. Suddenly, I had to do math equations and a cost-benefit analysis. My false binary paradigm of being cancer-free or not had fallen apart. And I was now faced with what seemed like the biggest decision of my life. To add a little bit more information, the doctor told us about a new study out of the UK, one whose results had not yet been published. That study attempted to determine if patients with bulky tumor, non-Hodgkin lymphoma were treated with radiation after chemotherapy had a higher survival rate than the patients who did not have the follow-up radiation. The early results strongly suggested that indeed the radiation did have a positive impact. Based in part on this unpublished study, my medical oncologist was leading towards recommending that I go through with radiation on the armpit area. Later, he admitted that it was an extremely close call, and without this study, he might not have reached that same conclusion. My sister, my wife, and I all continued to ask questions, centered around what we thought seemed to be 3 options: no radiation, radiation on both areas, or radiation to only one area of the body. The doctor told me that no matter what I decided to do, I should be celebrating, given that my test score of a 3 still technically meant that I had beaten cancer. It was hard for me to adapt a celebratory position, knowing that I was still living with a 1 in 8 chance of my lymphoma coming back without radiation. My feelings were mixed, to say the least. It was terrifying not to know what to do for the first time since I had been diagnosed with cancer. Up until this point, and especially since my sister had become involved, I always had one clear path that I just had to walk. Now, I was facing a fork in the road, and my confidence had evaporated. After thanking the doctor for his help, we left, and then we made an appointment to meet with the radiation oncologist that upcoming Friday. Mixed feelings and all. I had built up the idea that we would be celebrating some good news that day. And so in that light, I went ahead and sent out a message to my followers on Twitter. I knew this message would be a powerful one and had the potential to spread a lot of hope to those who were also going through a tough time. The responses I received were uplifting and celebratory and helped me to appreciate the battles that I had won, even though in my mind the war was not yet over. Quote, I beat my stage 3 cancer. April 23rd, 2018 at Big Cheds. Quote, thank you to everyone for your support. You guys gave me the strength to keep going and keep fighting. April 23rd, 2018 at Big Cheds. Sending out that tweet was a big moment for me because once I'd uttered those words to the world, there was no going back. My followers would now be celebrating the completion of my chemotherapy treatment. Even though I was conflicted about getting radiation or not, going forward, I had to walk the walk of a cancer survivor, appreciating his new chance at life. To work out some of the complicated matters bubbling through my mind, I spent a lot of time that night sitting by myself and listening to music. Putting all the jigsaw pieces together in the right order was impossible. I was unsure of how to feel or what to do, and I kept going back and forth with the merits of either doing or not doing radiation. looking for some inspiration as I flailed around emotionally. I scrolled through all the responses on Twitter to my message of beating cancer. And reading those messages, I became increasingly touched by the outpouring of support. All those well wishes from my followers really helped me to stop thinking about the future and to live in the moment with great appreciation for having survived chemotherapy and technically beating my cancer. This is a great moment to recognize and reflect upon some of those wonderful messages I received, and most importantly, to thank everyone for reaching out and lending me a shoulder to cry on when I needed it the most. There were literally hundreds of you who expressed your support while I was fighting for my life, and I am eternally grateful for that, and I really am. Quote, my mother-in-law is currently battling stage 4 breast cancer. I can't imagine the joy of hearing that you beat it. Bravo, and I'm thrilled to hear some positive news in that department. From Josh McGruff. Quote, I'm fighting stage 4 bladder cancer as we speak, and I'm determined to win. Congratulations on your fight. From Scott Barr. This is the best news of the decade, Ched. Very happy, very proud, and I'm sure great things are waiting for you to accomplish. Keep taking good care of yourself, brother. This just made my year. At Crypto Sid. Insanely proud of you, buddy. You knew you could do it from the beginning. I just hope you realize how much you mean to so many people and how happy we are for you. Also, don't forget, if you ever need help, it's okay to reach out. We got your back. Keep killing it. At The Profitable. Wow, I'm deeply happy for you. This gives me hope to fight and beat my stage 3 kidney disease. Many blessings. At Chief Ogabo. Congratulations, Ched. After going through it all, I'm curious what your thoughts are in treatment and which one helped you the most. Once again, congratulations. And I'm happy to hear you're doing better. At Randall R. Congratulations, man. You are an inspiration for many people, and I admire you not only for your trading calls. Enjoy your life and keep doing what you love the most. At Milan Masenik. One second. All throughout my battle with cancer and my chemotherapy treatment, I knew that I was not alone in this fight, as many others were fighting this battle with me. My friends and family had my back, as did so many of my online followers, which is why I continue to share with them my progress throughout every step of the journey. What I did not know or understand at the time was just how much of an impact my battle was having on others. This was illustrated by an interview with one of my followers, a very talented musician named Phil Labonte. I was honored and touched to hear those kind words from Mr. Labonte, who in this interview talked about how I had been a source of inspiration to him. Excerpt below. Credit at The Whale Reports. Phil, there's definitely some influencers out there that I follow closely and pay attention to when they're talking. Cheds, the guy that just beat his cancer. If you see this at all, Cheds, congratulations, dude. And I did, thanks, man. Great for you. I started following him and I noticed that his tweet was, I will beat my stage 3 cancer. And I was like, oh God, that's such a struggle. It sucks. I've lost family members to cancer, and most people have. To see that, it was a drag. And then I remember seeing the day that he posted, I beat my stage 3 cancer. And I was like, hands in the air, yes. And I'm thinking, I've never met this guy. I've never talked to this guy. I don't think we've ever even interacted on Twitter, but I just felt a huge charge of, yes, thank you, God. It's great, or whatever your deity of choice is. I don't care. Just yes. Super excited and happy that this guy did beat his cancer because it is such a mother. What an amazing feeling it was to know that so many people cared about and were rooting for me during my battle. As I mentioned before, it was hard to know how to feel about my scan results, so seeing all those wonderful responses helped me to feel good and to appreciate how far I had come in my fight with cancer. The following day was difficult for me emotionally as I kept going back and forth about the idea of radiation. My body and soul had just been through a traumatic experience with chemotherapy, and I felt like I needed at least 6 months to recover. My gut instinct after meeting with the doctors was to lean against having the radiation done. However, I wanted more information, so I continued to research online about how it would feel to experience radiation therapy. From asking around and reading on the internet, the general consensus was that the radiation was a lot easier to endure than chemotherapy. Learning that fact did make it seem a lot less scary. After some time in my man cave, pondering life, I decided to reach out to my followers again and to update them on my condition. Quote, that's the good news. The bad news is that it still has a 1 in 8 chance of coming back, so I will most likely have to do some radiation therapy in the coming weeks to decrease that chance. Meeting with the doctor soon. April 25th, 2018 at Big Cheds. We were extremely excited to meet the radiation oncologist so we could get some clear information. My sister had helped to arrange my initial appointment with the surgical oncologist. She had also helped to arrange my appointment with the medical oncologist, and now she helped to arrange my appointment with a radiation oncologist, or someone who treats cancer with radiation. My mother, sister, and I all waited for a little bit of time before the nurse led us back to an examination room. Earlier in the week, I had looked up this new doctor on the internet, and from what I could tell, she was more than highly credentialed. I had so many questions, and I was really looking forward to getting some solid answers about this scary new thing called radiation. A few moments later, we heard a knock on the door, and a young male doctor walked in and introduced himself. The doctor explained that he was working with my radiation oncologist, and then his eyes lit up as he recognized my sister. They briefly caught up and then explained to the rest of us that they had worked together on a research project a few years prior. It was a proud moment for me as I discovered that my sister knew this doctor. The synchronicity of the moment made me feel like I was in the right place and on the right path. It was also nice to get a little glimpse into her world, as before being diagnosed with cancer, I really didn't have much of an idea of what she did on a daily basis. Upon reflection, one positive thing I was able to take away from this experience was a greater appreciation for her work and for the medical field in general. After completing a physical examination, the assistant asked me a few questions about my medical history, and then the radiation oncologist walked in. She was short, petite, and had a cheerful nature about her. This new doctor, the radiation oncologist, then asked me about my medical history and how I was feeling now that my chemotherapy was done. Next, she began to explain what the options were for radiation and went on to say that the amount she was considering for me was 30 gray. This equates to the total amount of radiation I would receive over the course of the treatment schedule, which in my case would be 15 sessions. Essentially, she was recommending that I receive 2 gray per session. To help give us some context as to how much radiation 30 gray is, She explained that for other types of cancer, a patient might receive as much as 80 or 90 gray. Given that this was only a follow-up radiation, the proper course of treatment was the lower amount of quote unquote only 30 gray. She went on to explain that this would be what is referred to as palliative radiotherapy. Palliative radiotherapy is defined by the Cancer Research UK website as radiotherapy to control symptoms. It aims to shrink a cancer, slow down its growth, or control symptoms. It doesn't aim to cure the cancer. More or less, the sense I was getting from the doctor was that this was a somewhat minimal amount of radiation. Even though there was a real potential for me to experience side effects, the chance of those side effects was relatively small with her recommended dosage. This doctor, along with my medical oncologist, both agreed that it was a no-brainer to have the radiation done for my armpit area, but also that it was a much closer call for the abdomen area. She reiterated that since the armpit tumor was bulky, there were additional risk factors. According to the medical dictionary, bulky disease is a term used for large tumors or lymph nodes, usually more resistant to conventional therapy. Furthermore, a term for a cancer with considerable tumor burden, bulk, or furthermore, a term for cancer with considerable tumor burden, bulk. Bulky disease generally has a poorer prognosis independent of the histologic grade. A major priority in oncology is to debulk a tumor to optimize chemo or radiation therapy. Towards the end of the consultation, I asked the doctor about the classification of my armpit tumor as being bulky, as it had been larger than 6 centimeters. Given that the tumor in my abdomen had grown from roughly 3 to 5 centimeters in between the first and the second scans, would that tumor also not have become bulky had I not received the chemotherapy? My idea was that if we bought into the logic about my armpit tumor being bulky, we should also be thinking about the abdomen tumor the same way. The radiation oncologist told me that she was originally going to recommend treatment for just the shoulder area, but she admitted that I had raised a good point. It was both fascinating and baffling to me that the doctor really had not thought about my problem that way. We ended the appointment shortly thereafter, and the radiation oncologist explained that she wanted to consult with my medical oncologist before giving a final recommendation. She did, however, suggest that the technician scan both areas of my body, just in case we decided to go that way. By doing the preparatory work ahead of time, there would not be any further delays if the medical consensus was to do both areas of my body. We left that appointment with some information, but still more questions than answers. I left my family, said goodbye, and then the staff directed me to a changing area. Inside the changing area was a bench, a large mirror on the wall, and 4 gym-style faded gray metal lockers. In addition, a tall and plain-looking wooden cabinet stood on one side of the room, and inside were at least 20 pairs of hospital pants and shirts. I was directed to change into one of them. When I was ready to begin, I stepped out of the changing room and slid that big blue ID card they had given me under the barcode scanner. The lady at the front desk had given me this card when I first checked in, and I was told that upon arriving, I should change into the hospital clothes and then scan the card. And that would let the technicians know that I was ready to start my treatment. Next, a nice lady technician led me into a large, dimly lit room, which was centered around a table for the patient to lie on. Above the table were several multi-shaped machines connected by a long metal arm that looked like it could retract up to the ceiling. It felt like I was in a space age medical environment, despite the mundane computer desk and various untidy papers and clipboards laying about. The technicians were friendly and helped me to feel more comfortable, and then they explained that the purpose of that day's visit was twofold. The first step was to measure me for a molding, one that would be fit to my body to make sure the radiation went exactly where it was intended. The second step was to place 4 small tattoos on my torso, ones that the technicians would use to line me up with the machine's sensors at the beginning of each session. Even though if it was unclear if I was going to have the palliative radiation to both the armpit and abdomen areas, we took the doctor's advice and decided to prepare both sites just in case. Before we began, the technicians were kind enough to ask me what kind of music I wanted to listen to, and I chose classic rock. The teamwork I observed between the staff was impressive. They moved like a well-oiled machine, manipulating my body to line up with the scanning apparatus. Their general demeanor was relaxed and confident, and that helped me because I was still a bit scared or perhaps anxious as to what would be coming next. Everything about radiation therapy was new to me, and I looked forward to a time when these appointments would become routine. It felt a bit surreal to lay on the table and have those technicians poking at me, constantly repositioning my body. It was almost as if they were performing research on me. I was a guinea pig, a more than willing test subject, just hoping to survive the experiment so I could get back to my life. To get through the procedure, I told myself to relax and to go with the flow, and I began repeating a basic meditative mantra to stay as still as possible. Early on in my medical saga, I learned that you have to surrender yourself to and trust ultimately in the medical professionals and hospital processes. That way, you can give yourself the best chance to beat a deadly foe like cancer. Driving home after my appointment and looking out the window, I reflected on the fact that I still did not have the clear answers I wanted. This puzzle remained largely unsolved. That being said, I had a lot more information than I had earlier that morning. I was now in a better position, but unfortunately, there was still too much I did not know. Leading up to this appointment with the radiation oncologist, I thought that I would have all my questions answered and would leave that day with a strong sense of purpose and direction. That turned out to be yet another false hope I had created for myself. Over the course of the next few days, I tried to live my life as normally as possible. This consisted of taking my daughter to daycare, working from home, and spending time with friends. During my free time, I often went fishing and took long walks, trying my best to get back into a regular routine. At night, I sat in my man cave and listened to music. Sometimes Baroque classical and other times classic rock, trying to sort through all the complex emotions running through me. I was searching for some meaning in my life. Oh, how I yearned to look and feel like a normal person and have everyone else treat me that way. Deep inside, I was still trying to decompress and work through months of chemotherapy treatment and recovery. Instead of focusing 100% on my recovery and what it meant to be a cancer survivor, I had to think about 30 gray of radiation and strange machines circling around my body. And not only that, I had to make a decision that felt like the biggest one of my life so far, and without complete information to boot. To make that final decision, I had to suss through the words of the radiation oncologist, everything my medical oncologist had told me, and what I had read online. All that information left me feeling dazed and confused. After searching online for answers all weekend and early into the following week, I sent an email to my main doctor, the medical oncologist. My goal was to see what the consensus had been between him and the radiation oncologist. When he emailed me back, I was surprised to find out they hadn't yet discussed my case, as the radiation oncologist, for whatever reason, had not reached out to him as she had promised. It was now Tuesday, and I was supposed to start radiation in 2 days, and I still did not have an official recommendation from my medical team. It was incredibly important for me to know what their consensus was. Thankfully, I received another email later that night from my medical oncologist, and he explained that he had finally spoken to my radiation oncologist. They concluded that I should indeed have the radiation treatment done to both tumor sites. All right, that was Did You Just Say Radiation? And the next chapter is Starting Radiation. This is My Battles with Cancer, a patient and caregiver's candid memoir. I published this book in 2020, republished it in 2023. I'm a cancer survivor. My mother had cancer, so I was a caregiver. And I want this book to be available to everybody. So, you can get it on Amazon. You can listen to it on Audible. And it's free on YouTube. I'm reading it one chapter at a time. I've also published Trading Wisdom and Trading Quotes. These are also available on Amazon. I'm Big Cheds on Twitter, Cheds Trading on YouTube. I hope everybody's doing well, and I will talk to you soon.